Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else. Everyone, welcome. My name is Frans Viljoen. I'm the director of the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria. And you may wonder, in a sense, how is it that we welcome you in the name of the University of Pretoria? It is really our privilege to be associating ourselves to join with the other foundation for tonight's event. We do so as the Center for Human Rights at that university, and also as the Center for Sexualities, AIDS and Gender. And we have the co-director of that center, Pierre Brouard. Pierre, if you just stand a moment. That's Pierre. And the two centers together then with the other foundation are the co-hosts, if you like. It is really our privilege. And I think the topic of the evening, Reclaiming an African Narrative for LGBT Equality and Inclusion, is something that we as a center also try to advance interrogation and discussion around this issue. We in the center have a unit on sexual orientation, gender identity, and we have prepared, and now I think we've distributed this poster, and it's an effort, if you like, also to debunk the pervasive narrative about un-Africanness being associated with LGBTI issues. So we are also, in particular, honored to welcome one of the icons, and that is Danilo da Silva, who is here. You deserve a special word of welcome and recognition. Thank you, Danilo, for being here. And certainly, if you have other ideas about we want to remake this poster and have this narrative, making people proud and sending out the message very clear and loudly that there are great Africans who happen to be people from a certain sexual orientation or gender identity, who happen to be intersex person, and that it really doesn't matter. It matters, you know, the kind of lives we live and the kind of contributions that we make. That is what matters. We also fortunate to have the person who manages our SOGI unit here, Jeffrey Ugwaro, who is also an activist and had worked in Uganda before he joined us here. So welcome and thanks to them as well. Just to say, you know, that as the Center for Human Rights, we try to focus much on Africa. We work mostly in the field of human rights from a legal perspective. So we organize on an annual basis something called an African Human Rights Moot Court Competition. And that tries to bring law students from all across the continent together to look at the issues that affect us all. And they appear as if they are before the African Court on Human and People's Rights. And as you know, there is, in fact, now an African court that sits in Arusha. And one of the cases that we have dealt with over the years would also be, for example, an issue of decriminalization of consensual same-sex laws. And then students would be arguing this at least before the hypothetical court. And the idea is that we'll have a generation of lawyers who are ready and eager and committed to take up cases like these before the African court in actual fact. We also obviously have a number of academic programs, and all of them focus on African issues. We also have, and I invite you to be aware of this if you are not, we have a short course, a one-week course that will be running in February, that focuses on what we call sexual minority rights in Africa, and that is mostly for what we could say are the non-converted. So it's not so much for the community itself, but if there is maybe someone in government that you think could do well by attending a week-long immersion course for people who are slightly skeptical but would like to be better informed, that is a good opportunity to think about. So just onto the topic of tonight, before the panel then proceeds, I was just aware of how important it is to look at the whole way in which we conceptualize and even how we start talking about issues around sexual orientation and gender identity. I've just looked at a doctoral student's work who was investigating and looking at the rights of sexual minorities, so-called, in Malawi. And what he found was that it was almost excruciatingly difficult even to start a conversation because of the lack in Chichewa, the national language, of the concept of sexuality. But more than that, the concept of homosexuality. And he found that the only word available in the domestic, in the vernacular, already contained in it the idea that this would be sexual acts that involve minors and be coercive in nature. So we may think that we have a conversation, but if we do not even have the language to engage in that conversation. So I think the whole attempt that in the way we are engaged with tonight of Africanizing a discourse, thinking of ways in which we can talk through issues, has many dimensions, and I'm sure the panel will very ably take us through a number of these. So very briefly then, once again from my side, welcome to all of you. We are very proud to associate ourselves as the University of Pretoria to tonight's event. And I then hand over to the moderator of the session, Bella Matamba-Natso.
Thank you very much. Good evening, beautiful people. Oh, you got to be a bit warmer than that if you're in Pretoria. Good evening, beautiful people. My name is Bella Matamba-Natso. I'm really very happy to be here this evening as your moderator. I'm the co-chairperson of the Other Foundation Board of Trustees. And tonight we have a panel of 4 amazing activists, really, who occupy spaces in Africa where they have championed our rights. I'm going to start with my sister, Pansy Hlakula, who is South African, and she was with the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, based in Banjul. Please give her a warm African welcome. Thank you. And sitting next to her is Lenny. He's the former MP from Seychelles, the gorgeous island of Seychelles. And they also did work to change 40 years of legislation that discriminated against us. So please give him a warm welcome. From Namibia, the exquisite Deonce Cleopatra. And wonderful. And from a country that has made a very recent victory, Botswana, please give a warm welcome to Kane Youngman. We're going to try and keep it light, but we're also going to talk about important things. And how we're going to do it is our 4 panelists will speak about the work they've been doing, led very much by a question I asked them. And then we'll take a couple of questions and then break for drinks. How do you think about that? It's a deal? Okay. So let's start with Deonce. Okay. All right. When we were preparing for the panel, you said to me, I'm a mother, I'm a daughter, and I'm the child of a priest. Could you share with us what that means for you to be in Namibia?
Well, you know, when we were having the conversation, and the conversation started basically around from that conversation we had earlier in the morning about being more than just a trans identity. And we were sharing on how we as an organization believe in creating sort of like a new narrative, because trans has become the victim. Trans has become the hot potato. Trans has become that phenomena that now everybody wants to invest in because the pot of gold has sort of ended up there. And it is about portraying us as these persons that have been victimized and that are just the drama queens in the space, whereas you forget that we are more than our makeup and our high heels that we can walk around in all day, that we are mothers to children, and that our struggles as trans parents need to come through, but also that there's something beautiful there that you experience as a trans parent, and sharing that and how then that influences your engagement within the society. Being a daughter to a priest, and how that has been conflicting not only in my personal journey as a person trying to find myself, am I Christian, am I spiritual, because I'm being told I'm a demon, you know, I'm possessed, and I'm unwanted in the house. And then you have the father that is the pastor championing, basically becoming the champion within the house, fighting my trans struggle for me with my mother, but also within the society. And being a sister, it's been very difficult. You have people that are coming up in primary school, they're going to school, they're being bullied by premise of who their sister is, you know. And I know Jolarina, somewhere in the room, WTT, and some of the work that we've done with parliamentarians actually was from a personalized point of view, where we would bring in a trans child to share how it is that their lives are influenced by some of these policies that are made without them sitting around the table. It's again that thing of sharing that story and not making it come across as too much of a plight, because it's been a journey. It's been difficult, yes. My mom took 5 years to accept and just be able to use the correct pronoun, or just be able to have that conversation around my identity. And I have 3 little babies, and getting them to then meet their grandparents, because they ask about grandparents, and navigating that space to let them know, well, you know, you can't talk to grandma now because this situation is happening. And trying to get a child that young to understand. Sorry, I'm terrified of thunder. And it was a very difficult space for me to navigate within those 5 years. It's actually 7. Within the 7, it was 5 that there was a complete blackout. That I was not allowed to talk to family, you were not allowed to reach out to siblings. Going to church was an issue. So, and then we started having the conversation into the 2 years of the 7, where we've gradually now had my father, that is the pastor, facilitate the process between me and my mother and getting me reintegrated back into the family as a woman. And I think it's also one of those things that we forget as trans persons, that when we start transitioning, we make it about ourselves. And we forget that there's so many people around us that are affected by the decisions that we make. And that your mother needs to come to terms with the fact that she is losing a son and gaining a daughter. And we haven't given them that room, getting the family to adjust to that change.
Thank you very, very much for sharing. Thank you. Please. So Lenny, in Seychelles, when you were a parliamentarian, you were part of a team that guided and steered the changes of laws in Seychelles. Could you give us the backstory?
Well, good evening to you all. The Seychelles case is unique because I see that a lot of small island states are having difficulty to repeal the law that have been there for 40 years because they have been a British colony. So in Seychelles, the president announced that there'll be a review in the civil code. And part of the review is that we have to repeal the law that have been there for 40 years. And nobody have been sent to jail when the law have been there. So from that, then the National Assembly of Seychelles, we took the lead to bring about a discussion on the process of decolonizing the law. And through the process, in Seychelles, there's the Interfaith Council. That means all the spiritual leaders, they sit on the council. So we get them involved in the process, plus all the NGOs and the LGBTI group. So we brought them together, and the speaker came in the session, plus government official, that means the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Everybody came together for us to discuss. We created the platform so that the churches, those leaders can voice their concern and also listen to the views of the NGOs and professional people that have different sexual orientation. So from there, we manage to work with the church, and at the end of the day, we manage to shape the thinking of ordinary citizens. And we managed to repeal the law that have been there for 40 years.
And while we have you mic'd up, Lenny, why do you think you were successful in changing the law?
Well, to change the law, it's not easy because, you see, Seychelles, like I think a lot of small island states, we're Catholic, Christian that are dominant. And one thing we have learned as politicians, you never fight with the church, with the leaders. Because you as leaders, you have followers. And the same followers, they will go to those churches. So you try to work with them and then get them on board. And this is what the government in Seychelles work with the council. And in the eyes of ordinary people, it's like there's always consultation taking place. So this is how we went about to shape the thinking of the ordinary citizen. And plus, we got professionals, like I've said, that have a different sexual orientation. And the parents are spiritual leaders. And is it fair in those forums we get people to talk? Is it fair for you to send your own son, your own relatives, 14 years to jail? And when they come back, they have not changed. Will they send them back again? So that was the fundamental question. And we managed, like I've said, to shape the thinking and managed to repeal. And the church, they were very silent on that issue.
Thank you, Lenny. Thank you for your
Welcome.
hard work. You're no longer in government. You're no longer in the parliament, but you're still in government?
Well, I'm still with the government. Actually, I'm the CEO of a government parastatal.
So given the conversation we had this morning about the economy and the rights of people who are queer, what are your views about protecting the economic rights of people who are queer in Seychelles?
Well, like the discussion we had this morning, Seychelles is the economy, the main pillar of the economy is tourism. And we have a lot of tourists that comes to Seychelles. So those tourists that come to Seychelles, because they have a different sexual orientation, we prevent them from coming? No. Because they are the bread and butter of the ordinary citizen. And people, we are a nation that is tolerant. And everybody, with a population about of 92,000 people, everybody will have a friend or relative that have a different sexual orientation. So it's just the sexual orientation that is different. At the end of the day, for us, they are Seychellois. And under the Constitution of Seychelles, which is the supreme, their rights are guaranteed. So if you guarantee you have your own rights, they have their rights. So at the end of the day, we're putting Seychelles first. And that person, you can have a different sexual orientation, but that person is a Seychellois at the end of the day. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Kane, maybe you could pick it up from there, because we're seeing from the example of Seychelles that, like in Botswana, the law is a key lever to change. Could you let us know what happened in Botswana for those of us who perhaps weren't aware of the judgment that changed there recently?
Okay. The last couple of years have been a bit good for us, the LGBTI community in Botswana. Well, not to say that it came easy. I mean, like, for example, the first case that I'll talk about is the registration of Lekhabibo. we tried to form an organization in 2005. And then our government is very strategic and very good at playing delay tactics. Registration of an organization should take about a couple of weeks, if not a month. So it took our government actually 2.5 years to commit to a response, an official response, and say we cannot register you because of our organization will be doing A, B, C, D. And that basically started a long court process and long advocacy process. And that was in 2005. We only got registered in 2016, last year. Yeah. So, and who said justice is cheap? And it wasn't cheap. I mean, in terms of finances, it wasn't cheap in terms of the movement itself. Because when we started, we had certain individuals who started the institution, the organization, and along the way, many of us fell through the cracks. It's like, you know what, the government wins. I don't have the patience for this. I'm going to move on with my life. I'm going to have to do something else. And then along the way, the movement kind of kept getting cracks up to 2016. New people will come in, some people will come in, and it's like, okay, it seems like human rights, you know, the way we look at human rights, the way we look at human rights, we expect that when you jump on board today and say you want to make change, you expect to see the change happen tomorrow. But unfortunately, change is a process and it takes forever. And if you're not in it for the long haul, you kind of get disappointed, and that's why I guess many of our colleagues fell off along the way. And then this year alone, we had one of the most successful cases for the trans diverse community. A trans-identifying man was granted permission by the courts to change his gender mark on his identity card. And that on its own also was a process and a half. It didn't come easy. It took a lot of efforts from himself, his family, and everybody else. But one thing I like, though, is that in Botswana, we have a judicial system that has its own mind, that looks at things different to what the government does. And this is why we're also trying to avoid, we are aware that the government is the one that makes up, the parliament is the one that makes up the laws that are supposed to be overlooked by this judicial system. But for us to make sure that we get to these victories, it's basically pieces of small puzzles put 10 years ago. We started putting them together 10 years ago. That's supposed to lead to this big thing. The process, I mean, one other case that is happening right now is that of Ricky. She's somewhere in here. It's also another landmark case that is going to take in December 12th. Yeah. So it's also about trans-diverse community, their rights as Botswana individuals. And one thing I like about our country is that what we're trying to do is that make sure that our advocacy, our messaging, everything is done by us. From the registration case to these individual cases, we've had people who have showed interest in being part of the case, being part of our advocacy process, being part of the case itself. But we pick and choose. We say, okay, we've been fighting this myth for many years that homosexuality is an African. So we don't want any external influence to come in, because all it will do, it will just perpetuate that. We want ourselves to be in the forefront. Whether or not our English is broken, we will go. Yeah. Whether or not our message is not necessarily the best, it doesn't fit the international standards of messaging, we don't care. As long as we are able to talk, because if we are going to be talking to our legislators, we want it to be done in our own language, in our own way. Because it's not easy for a legislator. Our legislators have adopted this mentality that our government has adopted, this give and take relationship. Our government will do this wonderful gesture for the community. For example, 2010, they will change the Employment Act to say you cannot be terminated, you cannot have your employment terminated because you are gay. You cannot be fired, nor can you be refused employment because you are gay. They give you that and you stand up here, yeah, my government is wonderful, no government like this, and then they turn around and say, when they go to the UN and say, oh, you can prosecute gay people. It's like, wait, how is it okay for you to say in your country, gay people should not be discriminated, should not be fired, should not be refused employment, but when you go outside, you want other LGBTI individuals from across the country, from across the world, to be persecuted. So it's a bit tricky dealing with our government, but we have learned to be strategic in how we do things. We've learned that when you want to effect change, you go to members of parliament one-on-one and introduce yourself and make sure that they know you as an individual, not just once-off, because once-off thing doesn't work. You make sure that if you have to become part of their office furniture, you do that. Yeah, if you really need to do that, you make sure that that happens. But I've heard a lot about, here in this forum and elsewhere, about donors dictating our narratives. And one thing I want to say, and also maybe challenge all of us, is to say maybe what we need to start advocating for is making sure that each and every government funds all the CSOs in their own countries. Because we cannot expect to be saved by the international agencies every time and basically leave our government scot-free. We're basically saying, okay, we've given up on the government, they can't do anything, so we'll go and cry in somebody else's house. When we have our own house, we have our own mother who's supposed to be protecting us. If there's need for us to move and stay at government offices to make sure that they actually do something, we have to do that. Governments are supposed to take care of their own people because CSOs are there to close up the gaps that the government's implementation have. Yeah, we really need to start holding our government in terms of accountable to make sure that they fund CSOs. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Kane. So we have 3 panelists from 3 different countries showing us and telling us how we can continue to accelerate change, which is the theme of this meeting. I want to turn now to my sister Pansy. Maybe we can start from, you've just closed out 12 years at the African Commission. Can you give us some information about what the Commission does and why you thought it was a good place to work to change the situation on the continent?
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me. Yes, it's been a long journey. I became a member of the Commission in 2005. I served 2 6-year terms, and my second term ended on the 1st of November this year. The Commission is one of the organs of the African Union, and its mandate is to protect and promote human rights on the African continent. The Commission is based in Banjul, the Gambia. Most of you, I'm sure, did not know where the Gambia was until you saw Yahya Jammeh, the then president, refusing to leave office. And the Gambia became famous. Let me tell you, it's been a journey. I want to tell a story of how LGBTI advocacy began in the Commission. I'm grateful that I was given the opportunity to serve because I was quite naive when I joined the Commission. The Commission grants NGOs what they call observer status. For those of you who do not know, you apply, if you're an NGO, you are registered in your country, you promote the rights that are in the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. You disclose your sources of funding and also your governing structure. That's the requirement. Then you can apply for observer status. And once you are granted observer status, you have certain rights as an NGO. You can take the floor in the sessions of the Commission. You can influence the agenda of the Commission and so forth. So applications for observer status are moved in the public session of the Commission. So here I come and commissioners were 11. You are given a file to move the application. So they distribute the files in the commission. They give me a file, Coalition for African Lesbians. So here am I. Yes, this is an organization based in South Africa. This is its name. It has disclosed all the sources of funding. It has complied with all the requirements for granting observer status. I therefore move that CAL be granted observer status. And I thought it was going to be a straightforward yes. What happened after that, I was completely unprepared for it. One, because I'm a South African. Two, because our constitution protects sexual orientation. I tell you, the meeting got so chaotic and so spirited that CAL was not granted observer status. One of the reasons advanced was that sexual orientation is not entrenched in the African Charter. Therefore, CAL cannot be granted observer status. Now, I'm saying this because I've heard the whole narrative about sexual orientation not being African, not being protected in the African Charter. I don't know where that comes from. The Charter has rights for everybody. It says everyone has rights. It's equality, non-discrimination, equal protection of the law, freedom of association, freedom of assembly, human dignity. And the Charter says these rights are available to everyone. So the argument of sexual orientation not being protected by the Charter is an argument that baffles me, and I'll tell you why as I conclude. Because the arguments that have been used has been the Charter has limitation clauses that foreclose sexual orientation, and they quote these clauses. And I want to read these clauses because that's the way forward for me and to say how activists have to tackle this issue. They quote Article 27.2 of the African Charter, which says the rights and freedoms of each individual shall be exercised with due regard to the rights of others, collective security, morality, and common interest. The people who advocate against sexual orientation, they just quote morality. I don't know what morality is, it's another debate. But if you read the whole section, it talks about with due regard to the rights of others and common interest. The second one, which is even more interesting, is 28, which says every individual shall have the duty to respect and consider his fellow beings without discrimination and to maintain relations aimed at protecting, safeguarding, and reinforcing mutual respect and tolerance. Now, this is a document that was drafted more than 30 years ago. It talks very profound words, talks about promoting, safeguarding, and reinforcing mutual respect and tolerance without discrimination. That's Article 28. You go to 29.7, it says individuals shall have the right, the duty to preserve and strengthen positive African cultural values in his relation with other members of the society in the spirit of tolerance, dialogue, consultation, and in general to contribute to the promotion of the moral well-being of society. You have to tell me in these profound words, where do you find sexual orientation being un-African? Because if you look at the history of all the rights, tradition and culture is never static. It evolves. If you look at tradition, religion was used to oppress black people, white people in this country used religion to oppress black people. That evolved. Even traditions such as genital mutilation, female genital mutilation, child marriage were accepted at some point. But because tradition evolves, they are now a taboo. What I'm saying to you, there's a disconnect between what your governments say at national level and what they say in Addis Ababa. And that's where you need to hold them to account. At national level, they will decriminalize the law and so on. When you are in Addis Ababa, because as my last point, the commission granted CAL observer status. Addis Ababa, the policy organ decided that the commission should withdraw the observer status of CAL because CAL does not represent anything African. And when, for the past 2 years as chairperson, I have been presenting the report of the commission because the report of the commission is presented in Addis Ababa by the chairperson. I tell you the attack that we have been under. And I think part of it, I was saying there was a gender perspective to it. And I asked myself at some point, if I was a man presenting this report, would these men have attacked me the way that they did? To say, when are you withdrawing the observer status of CAL has been the consistent, and none of your countries, including mine, have come to our defense. Mine, I would understand, they would say they are conflicted because I'm South African. I would understand their silence. But I don't remember Seychelles, I don't remember Namibia, I don't remember Botswana, or any of these countries saying these people are doing their work, they're interpreting the charter, they're doing the work that we gave to them, let's support them. So you have a lot of work to do on the African continent. It is rough.
Thank you, Sis Pansy. I think now what we can do, if our tech team will assist, is circulate some roving mics. Thank you, Virginia. If you could show by raising your hand if you have a question. We have about half an hour, so let's take questions from our panelists. Indicate who you want to put your question to. We very seldom get together in the way we are today, so let's make the most of the time that we have.
I answer in the name of Stephen Matenga, a freelance journalist from Zimbabwe. You gave us a very good account of bravery at Africa Union level. But since we are a gathering of SADC, do you think the structures of SADC are the same? And do you think there are opportunities for this gathering to manipulate, for a start, the SADC level?
Thank you. I think she's noted the question. We'll take the next question from behind me. Sorry, I have my back to you, which is very un-African, but please forgive me.
Yeah.
No stress. Hi, my name is Roy. I just love the panel. It kind of takes this in the personal struggle of Deonce, and then in the courts, and then the politics, and then at a continental level. And a lot of the discussions that we've been having are how we now string those all into one narrative to get to change, right? It's difficult to have them in these separate fights. So this is kind of an open question. How do we now make this string? How do we link all of these stories and narratives together to get to the outcome where we are changing continental policies and processes?
Thank you. So for all our panelists, a question about how do we stitch this African quilt together? Yeah? Okay. Over here, Chester. Thank you, Virginia.
Good evening, I'm Chester Samba from Zimbabwe. My question is to Pansy. In your honest opinion, is there hope for LGBTI activists to access justice from the African Commission, given the context that we're coming from and the very strong positions of our governments? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. My question is, where do we start? Because we've spent like the whole day today, talking about how do we advocate, the importance of like lobbying people that make laws and, like sitting in desks that have been put together by political parties in trying to influence the agenda and also realizing that they represent constituencies. Where do we start? Because it's devastating, and we see now why African leaders at large have got that nerve, you know, to be transphobic and to be homophobic in various African countries.
Thank you. I see a hand behind you, Virginia.
Hi, everyone. Hello. Sis Pansy Tlakula. My question will be, here in South Africa, we've got a good constitution and policies. But our government doesn't fund the LGBTI organizations. Or I would say all the organizations that are doing wonders work, they are funded from international. Why is that so, whereas they've got good policies, but practically they don't practice them?
Thank you.
My question is very simple, I think, and got prompted by the sister here at the back. Do our leaders that we never have access to have an understanding of who we are?
Thank you.
That's it.
All right.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Advocate Pansy, we are bombarding you with so many stories, but I just wanted to maybe ask you to remind us about the foot that we already have in the door at the African Commission with regard to Resolution 275 and talk a little bit about that as well. Thanks.
All right. Okay. So just to help, okay, you cool? All right. Just to help Sis Pansy, because she's got the lion's share of the questions, I'm going to start over here with Kane and work down. Yeah. So Kane, if you could go first, please.
Okay. About stitching the kilt, I think we've talked a lot about this. We need to be promiscuous. We need to be promiscuous in terms of the intersectionality and not be discriminative and make sure that we occupy each and every single sector in the country. Where they're talking about housing rights, we need to be there. Where they're talking about youth, we need to be there. Hell, even if they're talking about goats, rearing goats, farms and whatever, we need to be there. Because we've had instances where an effeminate gay man in Botswana was rejected from applying for a government loan or subsidy to be a farmer because they just looked at the boy and said, oh, as effeminate as you are you even able to look after cattle? We can't grant you this. So in all honesty, I think we really need to be promiscuous in terms of intersectionalities and make sure that we don't leave any area unattended. Because for me, that's the only way we'll make sure that people actually do know that we are beyond our sexuality. In every person, in me, there is a man, there is a brother, there is an uncle, there is a relative, there is a whole lot of things in each and every individual. And the one other thing that I wanted to say is that also we need to go back to the basics. I don't know whether it was Danilo who said this earlier on. We need, in Botswana, the way the system works is that members of parliament have a timeline when they go to their constituencies. We need to learn parliamentary schedules and then go and torment them at constituency levels. Because, like what Linda just asked, when they're in Gaborone, when they're at headquarters, when they're in parliament, they're untouchable. They're on Clyde 9, you see them on your Mercedes S-Class and everything, they're untouchable. You can't even get an appointment. So the best solution for us is like, go to the districts, go to the constituencies where you will torment them. And one other strategy that we have adopted is that since most of these traditional gatherings are done during the day, most of us here have a normal 8 to 5 job. You can't leave and you can't tell your job, I'm going to a traditional meeting. at Khotla. We call it a Khotla in Botswana. You can't tell your boss that I'm going to a meeting. A member of parliament is coming to our constituency, so can I have time off? You can't. So what we do is like, okay, since our parents, our elders are the ones who have time, so what we do now, we have formed what we call a PFLAG, Parents and Friends of the LGBTI. We take them through training, awareness raising for the LGBT. We make sure that we train them, we work with them. They go through all these committees, your village development committees, your HIV committee, so that in our absence, they're able to advocate on our behalf. Because when the member of parliament comes, they come during the day, and most of us will be at work. And unfortunately, the world is run by those who show up. They will be there showing up, but we'll be somewhere in the cities working. And they'll get to make the decisions in our absence. So the only way is for us to make sure that those ones who are always available to show up understand matters. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Deonce?
I think the meeting in itself has already set the tone, starting from the premise of personalization and sharing that personal narrative and using that personal narrative to speak and putting it all together, and how that personal narrative is sort of linked to the language that we now use, and how this then pushes into the whole it's African, it's un-African discussion. Owning those, what we deem derogatory words that have existed within culture and tradition, be it mastabane, be it morphe, taking that power back and using those words in a positive way to communicate, because we're being told language is the barrier, right? What you're talking about does not exist, so you don't understand trans, or you don't understand lesbian, or you don't understand gay. But there's been one word that we've used as a society for years to describe these different individuals. And perhaps going back to that African narrative and really exploring what that meant and how, as LGBT persons, we have existed for so long in this society. And there have never been issues. Why is there now an issue now that we are visible? And that we're putting our stories out there and we're putting our own narrative out there. Issues on morality and this whole thing at the African Union and African Commission level about people's rights versus human rights, bringing me to that collective agenda of, as a movement, are we speaking together? Because I think that's what we're not doing. Also, I'm trying to put a link together as to whereas my right as a trans person, our rights as LGBT persons together, our rights as communities together, what makes me immoral and what makes you moral. Also around Western versus African. So now I'm un-African, I'm influenced by the West, I'm funded by the West, but you want to hold me accountable to Western laws, Roman Dutch laws that have been there since 1927. Why are we not having that conversation with our governments and our parliamentarians? Accessibility and inaccessibility of parliamentarians. Do we target them as a collective, or do we work with that one individual that is able to champion? When we work with that one individual, how do we make sure that one individual has support? And when they are getting gunned down at the African Commission, the least you could do is write that one email or a statement as the collective to say, this is how we're supporting you and we are behind you. Yeah, I think I'm gonna, and also, like my comrade here was saying, reaching out to our parliamentarians when they are doing their standing committees, those little groups, when they go out to society and are talking about a certain bill. Why are we not in that space and making sure that we're being heard? Making sure that at least from that level we're able to influence, and even if it's one line that shows up on a document when it gets to the National Assembly or National Council, that at least that visibility is taking place. And stop sitting in these comfortable couches and listing all of these things and start actioning.
Thank you. Lenny.
Well, on my part, the answer is very simple. Because in each country there's a constitution that guarantees the rights of each individual. So this is where we start. Plus, you have all countries, they have endorsed the United Nations Charter that guarantee the rights of everybody, plus we have the African Charter also. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Pansy?
Well, I have a lot of questions. SADC, are there opportunities? If you're talking about SADC as an organ, I'm not sure, because SADC is very opaque. It's not welcoming even to NGOs. So the tribunal is dead. So I'm not sure at SADC really, at that level, at the policy organ, how do you even navigate? It's a straightforward answer. How do we link the narratives together? I think we need to have a strategy at national level and then at continental level. And at national, it's what NGOs can do and how they link up with national human rights institutions as well, because we have to bring them on board and use the jurisprudence and the documents of the commission in litigation. I think litigation as well, we have to have that as a strategy. I mean, my brother there from the center talked about a resolution 275 of the African Commission, which was adopted by the Commission in 2013, I think it was, or 2014, which is protection of persons against violence and other human rights violations on the basis of their real or imputed sexual orientation and gender identity. I mean, and there's also general comment number 4, which talks about redress of victims of torture. And the general comment lists LGBTI persons as victims of torture. And these are the documents that we have to familiarize ourselves with so that when we litigate at national level, we can actually make reference to those. And that's how we then begin to link the pieces together in terms of using that jurisprudence at national level to advance the rights. But it's a lot of work. But what I need to also inform you about, there's a lot of ignorance. I think we should not underestimate the ignorance among our leaders on issues of LGBTI rights. So I think we have a lot of work to educate, start with the clergy, the faith-based organizations, the members of parliament. The ignorance is actually frightening. Even our leaders at continental level, even a person like myself, I'm still learning, and even with members of the commission, it's a learning curve for all of us. So we need to intensify the advocacy. Is there hope? Yes, I'm an eternal optimist, because I tell you, in human rights work, I tell you, you have to be prepared to take 10 steps forward and 20 backwards like that, and celebrate even the smallest of victories. The fact that we have Carl having observer status before the commission, it's a big victory which we must guard and guard jealously. And so we shouldn't give up on our leaders. That's all that we have. We have all these institutions, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, the African Court. We have to make them work because they are ours. And we have to begin to change the narrative ourselves. I mean, generally, that's what I want to say, if I have not answered. So we have a foot in the door with all these documents, and we have to move forward. Don't be discouraged by what I say. And you have to, those who don't have observer status with the commission, please apply for observer status, because that gives you the platform, to engage with the commission. It's not an easy space, but I do encourage you to apply for observer status.
Thank you. We're very fortunate this evening to have Gary Roda, who's the Human Rights Officer at the Commonwealth Secretariat. Would you like to come and offer a vote of thanks to our panelists?
Thank you so much, Bella. I know it's late in the evening and we have a little bit of advocacy fatigue, so I'm going to keep it very short. Firstly, I just want to introduce myself because you probably might have seen the little Commonwealth sign on the board. The Commonwealth Secretariat is a voluntary association of 52 countries that spans the Caribbean, Asia, Africa, and the South Pacific. And out of the 72 countries that criminalize same-sex intimacy, 36 of those are situated in the Commonwealth. So we have a role to play. And of the amount of countries in Southern Africa, 10 of those are Commonwealth countries. So you can see that there's a different role for us to play. What role do we play? The Commonwealth Charter, which basically speaks about what rights we endeavor to protect, calls for respect and dignity and the protection of human rights. So we definitely have a mandate to protect rights of everyone in the Commonwealth. Notable achievements I have to mention is the establishment of a parliamentary human rights caucus in Kenya, which we linked human rights activists with parliamentarians in Kenya and in the region. We also engaged with parliamentarians in Sri Lanka on the constitutional review process, and this has culminated in the inclusion in the draft constitution of explicit LGBTI protections. So there are innovative mechanisms, and I want to continue with, is it Roy, that in addition to the continental and the regional and national mechanisms, that there are international mechanisms that also should be exhausted. Finally, I would like to thank Neville and the rest of the other foundation for having us here. It's been an amazing first day. And I would like to thank the moderator and the panelists for contributing to further this fantastic discourse. And I would like to thank finally all the activists and everyone who came out today and continue to engage on this important processes. Thank you.